This really is a question of, do you want to be the driver of the car, or do you want other people to be jumping in and out of the driver's seat and driving the car and you don't know where you're going?
Welcome to the Independent School Podcast. Thinking and acting strategically is the key to both securing the future of your school and helping to build a more equal and just world. My name's Juliette Corbett. I'm a consultant, speaker and facilitator, specialising in helping independent schools. In this podcast, I translate tried and tested strategy and fundraising techniques into a language that works for schools. So if you're a senior leader in a private school and you want your daily work to feel less exhausting and more strategic, and if you want once more to feel the joy of making the world a better place through education, then you're in the right place. Welcome, and let's get started on this week's episode. Hello and welcome to this week's episode. So we are now in August 2021. We have had about 18 months that no one could ever have predicted with regards to the disruption that we've had to the normal way of life. Now, I'm going to be doing something a little bit different this week. I'm going to be replaying an episode for you, which I recorded pretty much a year ago, summer 2020. And it's a conversation that I had with Jo Beckett, who is the former joint CEO of IDPE and also a highly qualified executive coach. And we were talking about resilience. Now, back in 2020, this was about how to cope with fast-paced change. But also in our interview, we talked about the importance of rest, the importance of looking after yourself. And I found that this has been absolutely critical for my success over this last year. And for all of the clients that I've been working with who are leaders within independent schools, I have been encouraging them to take a rest. So here in the Northern Hemisphere, at least here in the UK, we are in summer. And so this is a time where you should be taking some rest, taking some time for yourself to recuperate, refresh, take a different perspective on life. And actually, if you're listening to this during the middle of the summer holidays, I realise some of you may be in the Southern Hemisphere, you may not have quite the same holiday pattern as we do up here. But if you're listening to this in the middle of the summer holidays, I'm guessing that you may need a reminder to stop, to rest, to recharge your batteries. So what I wanted to do this week was to replay this critically important conversation that I had with Jo so that you can understand a little bit more about the connection between our performance in the office, in our day-to-day work, and how we are feeling in our physical bodies in terms of taking a physical rest, and how we're feeling in terms of mental health. And it's critically important that we recharge our batteries. And for those of us, and I admit during this interview, you'll hear in this conversation that I find this a real challenge. I find it hard to turn off, to stop thinking and to just rest. And for me, it was really helpful to hear last summer from Jo about this strong, scientifically evidenced connection between our performance in our working life and the way that we're feeling. Really quickly, before we dive into the detail, I want to make sure that you make the most of the time you invest listening to this podcast. And the best way to do that is to make sure you grab a copy of my free ebook, The Strategic Independent School Leader. It outlines how to answer the 6 essential questions that will clarify your school strategy and secure its future. In the world of business, strategy can be full of jargon, but it doesn't have to be that way. This is a jargon-free tool tailor-made to help private school leaders think and act more strategically. Download your free copy today at www.consultjuliette.co.uk/ebook. So with no further ado, I'm going to dive into this episode, this replay with Jo. And first of all, I'll start by telling you a little bit about her and her background, and then we'll get into the conversation. Hello and welcome to this week's episode all about resilience for school leaders and fundraisers. And this week we're in excellent hands. We're joined by Jo Beckett, who's been the CEO of IDPE since 2009. Now, for those of you who don't know, IDPE is the Institute of Development Professionals in Education. So it's a membership organisation for fundraisers in independent and state schools, and it's the leading membership organisation for schools fundraising here in the UK. As well as being IDPE's CEO, Jo is also a qualified psychologist and an executive coach. She's trained to teach resilience and mindfulness, and she specialises in executive coaching in the education and charity sectors. She's got over 25 years of experience in senior leadership and business development, so she really understands the stresses and strains of leading an organisation through challenging times. Now, I don't know about you, but I've been hearing a lot about resilience in these last few months. And during this episode, we share some top tips for building your personal resilience through this COVID-19 pandemic. So this isn't an academic discussion. It's going to give you some really solid takeaways which you can use to build your personal resilience. We also explore the connection between personal resilience and strategic thinking. And we've reflected a number of times on this podcast already about the importance of strategic thinking and the ability to think innovatively and creatively during these times of rapid change. So it's really interesting what Jo will share with us about how building our personal resilience isn't just about feeling more confident and feeling better about our job, but genuinely impacts on our performance. And at the moment, in particular, strategic thinking is a critical part of that performance. Okay, so that's enough from me, and let's dive straight into the episode. So I'm delighted to be joined today by Jo Beckett, and we're going to be talking about personal resilience and the role of resilience in how independent school leaders are responding to the COVID crisis that we're in at the moment. So welcome to the Independent School Podcast, Jo.
Thank you, Julia. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
So I'm sure there are hundreds of definitions out there, but what do you think we mean when we talk about resilience?
Resilience is a broad area and a broad topic, and there are many different definitions of resilience. But I'm going to start by just sharing one. I did a teaching course to teach resilience skills, and it was with the University of Pennsylvania. And the program was based on Martin Seligman, the very well-known American psychologist who did a lot of work in positive psychology. He's probably best known for his work in positive psychology and well-being. Mm-hmm. And the definition that the University of Pennsylvania give on resilience is that it's a set of characteristics, abilities and resources that enable achievement of positive outcomes despite exposure to significant threat or adversity. So you can see why that's so important in the current climate in terms of building our resilience. So you can take from that definition that if you have high levels of resilience, then you're more likely to be able to flex and adapt and surf this wave of, extreme uncertainty and challenge rather than get engulfed by the wave. And I think the first thing that's really important to say is people aren't born resilient.
Yes.
And that it's not something that's in your DNA. It's something that we learn. And everyone has different sort of bandwidths in terms of their ability to deal and manage with, uncertainty and change. And so everyone, in the current climate, you could take, 100 head teachers or 100 directors of development, and they'd each give you different ratings in terms of how well they thought they were adapting. Some people who have high levels of resilience are going to be thriving in this situation. It's given them a renewed energy. They're working in a new context. It's making them think more strategically and forward thinking, and they're actually going to be loving it. Whereas other people will literally have been paralyzed and sort of like in overwhelm by the degree of change and pressure and uncertainty.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's not something static that we should be thinking about. It's something that evolves through our lifetime, but is it also something which we can feel changes by day to day or by the type of challenge which we're facing?
Yes, I think this sort of brings me on to performance. And we've all had days when we feel absolutely amazing. We feel top of our game. We're absolutely the best that we can be. We could be giving a presentation, we could be in a meeting with a key stakeholder or, with staff. And we just know that we're as good as we can be. And then we all have days where we finish the day and we go, oh my goodness, I wish I'd done that differently. I wish I'd had a different conversation. I messed that up. And you feel completely differently about your day, even though you're in the same role, even in the same organization. Mm. And what I will say is that performance and feeling and being our best is really the end goal of the executive coaching that I do. So as a leader, I've experienced both the highs and lows of being a leader and leading various different types of organizations, commercial organizations, charities, through extremely challenging times. And so I've experienced, both spectrums. And for me, executive coaching has been I say a lifeline, that sounds a bit overdramatic, but it's been a mechanism to support me and also enable me to develop as a leader.
Yeah.
And really sort of find ways to self-manage when the going gets tough.
Absolutely. I mean, I've used executive coaching a couple of different stages in my career, and it's been really interesting to reflect on that recently and to see that it has changed the way I felt. I felt much more confident and much more capable, but it's had a direct impact on the outcomes of how I'm doing at work as well. So the actual performance outcomes have been directly linked to boosting in confidence or in capability in some way, and that is directly as a result in various different stages of my career as a result of the executive coaching that I've used. So I've experienced myself how beneficial that can be. So I'd be interested to know how you have found this has played out during the COVID-19 pandemic. So I mentioned just a few moments ago about things changing on a kind of week by week or day by day basis, and I've seen on the conversations that I've had and the way I've experienced it that it does seem to sometimes be that the crisis that we're going through feels like it's exacerbated that up and down fluctuation of having good days and quite challenging days, and people really feeling that they need to strive to be the best they can be in order to really surf the wave of optimism and creativity which is out there as a silver lining. And that puts additional stress on all of us, I think. What have you been seeing from independent school leaders in the coaching that you've been doing with regards to how this crisis has affected our resilience or our performance?
Well, I think it's probably fair to go back to my previous point that everyone's got a different bandwidth, and equally, everyone is in their own unique set of circumstances during this pandemic. There is not one person I've spoken to who has exactly the same circumstances. But what I do know is that some of the big challenges are actually expectations being higher, pressures being more, because there's a threat to business, there's a threat to income, and there's also less resource. And we're juggling things like, homeschooling, working from home, internet, not working. And then we've got, people who've been furloughed and, everything has changed literally overnight for them. So there's a real ream of challenges, but particularly I think from a leadership perspective, my own perspective, and talking to some head teachers, it's been a prolonged period of almost crisis management.
Yes.
And prolonged periods where you've got your foot on the accelerator on overdrive means that you're going to deplete your fuel reserves. And so even the most robust, resilient, experienced leader will be feeling low on fuel just because of the prolonged time that's been in place. And so the challenges have been really sort of quite varied and marked, and affecting different people in different ways. But if we just take a step back to Maslow's theory, hierarchy of needs.
Yes.
And we look at those very basic needs, and we look at, the higher end need of self-actualization. Many of us will have been faced with a situation where we've fallen back down that ladder. So we're thinking, is this organization sustainable? Will I have a job? How will I pay my mortgage? How will I look after my children? And it may not be that marked for many people, but for some, it will have impacted. And even if it hasn't impacted economically, it may have impacted in terms of health. Maybe you've got elderly parents. Maybe you have a member of your family that's vulnerable. So you are actually right back to the bottom of that hierarchy of needs. You're in sort of survival mode. You're thinking about health, living, breathing. You're thinking about shelter, food. And actually, when we're in that survival mode, our brains are going back to a different time. So all this pressure to sort of innovate and think strategically and, take risks. And actually what's happening physiologically is our brains are in that sort of very early stage of development where we're in fight or flight. That inhibits that part of the brain that actually we need to call on right now. And that for me is the nub of why executive coaching is so powerful. Because many of the people I've been coaching over the last few weeks, intensively as part of IDP Live, have been affected, by the various challenges, individual challenges, and their brains, you're not in a place to think clearly. You can't think strategically. You can't prioritize as well as you could do if you weren't in fight or flight or under so much pressure.
Yes.
And so what this executive coaching has given individuals is the space to be listened to, the space to sort of reflect, the space to be challenged and to pick through, what is getting in the way, to do visionary work as well. So to tap into parts of the brain where you're not inhibited by your emotions, and to tap into parts of the brain where you can think ahead, you can imagine future scenarios, where you can imagine that innovation. And really by flipping it and going to that imaginary brain, you then can pull out some of the things that are blocking your progress and coming in the way. And then it's a question of putting in steps to get closer to that visionary goal or realizing that project or whatever it is. So it's sort of a process, and it's very much based on neuroscience and physiology.
So interesting. I remember thinking back now to the early stages of the crisis, and it just felt like everybody was going through simultaneously a sort of a brain fog shock reaction. And I wonder now whether that's because even those people who were feeling quite confident in their job and their institution and their organisation, a certain amount of mental bandwidth was just taken up with, how am I going to get food? How am I going to get toilet paper? How am I going to get hand sanitizer? Simple things which we just take completely for granted were suddenly front and centre of making sure that we were providing for our families and looking after them and staying safe. And then I noticed as we went through the first kind of 6 weeks, some people started to come through that stage and start to be wanting to think more strategically. But then the coming out of that stage has been very much staggered. So we all went into it in quite a similar time, but different people have come out of it in a different, people have been through different phases depending on their personal circumstances and how much of that baseline Maslow's hierarchy of needs they're still having to underpin and to strengthen, depending on to what extent their health is at risk, their family is at risk, and so on, and their job as well.
Yes, it's definitely a spectrum, I think, a spectrum of contrast, actually, from, where you get early adopters when something changes or something new comes out, and you've got the early adopters, you've got the trailblazers that are in a position to think strategically, think dynamically, and react quickly. And some commercial businesses are really good examples of that, aren't they? There are numbers of businesses that have literally sort of flipped their business model overnight. But, in schools and education, it's a very different culture.
Yes.
And it's not, even if you are the most dynamic leader and able to think strategically and be willing to take risk, it doesn't mean to say that your governing body will be.
No, or indeed your staff.
Exactly.
I think part of leadership is bringing people with you. And so even if you feel completely comfortable, confident, you thrive in change, you're the kind of person for which this is actually quite an exciting time, recognizing as a leader that there will be people in your team or in your school who are not in that position, at least not at the moment, to feel that optimism is a really important part of being an empathetic leader.
And actually, that's a really good, I wanted to make a really important point, because we're talking about performance here and feeling and being our best, and resilience is sort of like the cog in this. But resilience and emotional intelligence are intrinsically linked. And we've talked about, people being in different places, emotionally and economically. And what I will say is that the degree of emotional intelligence a leader possesses is a more accurate reflector or indicator of future success than IQ.
Yes.
So emotional intelligence is such a key competency for any leader right now. And if I just take 3 elements of emotional intelligence, so self-awareness is one. So that's awareness of self, being able to regulate your emotions despite adversity and pressure, and being able to balance yourself, but it's also awareness of other. And it's not just awareness of other in terms of working with different individuals. It's also awareness of different cultures and ways of doing things as well. And then you've got self-efficacy, which is really knowing yourself. So knowing your strengths, knowing your areas to work on, and also understanding yourself well enough that you know what you struggle with in times of uncertainty, in times of pressure, and what resources and tools you can pull down, you can download to actually help you. So that self-efficacy is the second one. And then the third one that I tend to focus on most in the coaching is actually accurate, optimistic, and flexible thinking. And emotional intelligence, all of these characteristics sort of fit into performance. So if you take ourselves, that first part, which is self-awareness, self-regulation, be it learning how to manage ourselves. None of us have been in this situation before. And so we're all learning. You know, we've had adversity before, we've had uncertainty, but nothing like this. And I think that the key message is that overwhelm is optional. I've seen and spoken to so many people who are completely paralyzed by the sense of overwhelm that they have. It is optional. And it really is down to us as individuals to start noticing what helps us to self-regulate. You know, for some people it's going to be going running, you know, once a day in the morning. For other people it's going to be meditating before they go to bed. But for all of us, it is actually about allowing ourselves time to reflect and notice how we're feeling and what makes us feel calmer, better, more energized, all those positive things. There's another part to managing yourself within performance as well at times like this, and that's self-talk. Now, we've all got, doesn't matter how successful we are, we've all got those inner voices, those inner critics, that self-talk. And actually, that's the thing that is most prevalent, that is coming through when I talk to people at the moment.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
These are things called thinking traps, sometimes thinking errors. And what they do is at times like this, we need to be open to the possibilities. We need to be open to the opportunities. But our thinking traps can mean that we're much more narrow focused, much more blinkered, and we're going to miss those opportunities to innovate. So an example of a thinking trap would be jumping to conclusions, making assumptions. You know, so for example, the world's in pandemic, so many people are unemployed, no one's going to have any money to give to a bursary campaign.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely false assumption.
Yeah. So there's no point in us launching a hardship fund because no one's going to give.
Yeah. It's those things which they are traps, because you can see that there is some logic in there. It's not just an immediate rejection of hard work or rejection of change or anything like that. There is a logical flow of argument. It's just that it's an untested assumption that is masquerading as a logical flow of argument. And so it's having the ability to notice those and to work out how you're going to test that assumption, either by talking to peers and others in the sector and check if everyone's feeling the same way. But even then you can get this group think, or just by trial and error and trying things out and seeing what happens and getting actual feedback from the real world rather than just being in a thinking trap.
Yeah, and I think there's various different techniques and practices and tools that can be used at times like this to support the process of risk-taking, decision-making. A couple of tools we were talking about last week were the Oracle questions. So this is a sort of questioning mechanism that enables you to see different future scenarios and actually work back. Again, it's tapping into that strategic visionary thinking. Another one is putting things into perspective by looking at best, worst, and most likely outcome. And these are all techniques, that I've used over the years that have helped me, mitigate risk and optimize opportunities.
Absolutely. And the other area which I think is really interesting, we've touched on kind of strategic and visionary thinking. And strategic thinking is something that's fascinated me for ages. Anyone who knows me knows I'm slightly obsessed by strategy. But strategic thinking is one of these things where, like resilience, it has so many definitions it can feel a bit fuzzy. But it is this ability to plot out through time how things may evolve over time and what might change, the cause and effect that might come into play, the possibilities that are open. And it is about widening your thoughts and having that divergent thinking where you're saying no idea is is a silly idea. No thought process is to be rejected. Let's just throw everything open and see what happens when we follow these trains of thought to their logical conclusion, and then only then taking the decision about what is the strategic choice that the organisation is going to make. And there's this clear link there between strategic thinking and this resilience and emotional intelligence.
Yes, absolutely. Because you just talked about divergent thinking, and to allow ourselves to sort of not have any blinkers or barriers, we need to be feeling safe. We need to be feeling calm. And if we're not self-regulating, and if we're not able to bring down our levels of anxiety, discomfort, I don't know how extreme they are and different in different people, but if we can't bring ourselves down to a calm place, then we can't tap into this prefrontal cortex, which is going to help us think strategically. And there's also, I think the thinking traps play a role here as well, Juliet, because if for many of us, we rely on our ability to sort of, assess risk to sort of help us do our jobs. But sometimes, particularly when we're looking at strategic thinking, applying that filter isn't actually helpful. And this is where coaching actually unlocks those limits, those self-limiting beliefs. You might come up with an idea. It happened this morning in a coaching session where someone had come up with an idea, but then someone had said something, and it's like, oh, can I really do this? And well, if that's true, then this, and you talk yourself out of it before you've actually got the idea off the ground. And so I think what coaching gives is a safe space to explore a possibility and to look at, some future possibilities and outcomes, some risks, and actually assess them and decide if and how you want to take it forward. So I think that it plays a really important role, certainly as a team. Now we've done IDP Live, we've innovated, we've taken a risk. We're going to be looking at the feedback, pulling together the intelligence, and we're going to be doing some strategic work over the summer to say, how do we move forward with this? How do we realize future possibilities to enable more schools to develop professional fundraising programs?
Yeah, absolutely. And that strategic thinking, you're right, it is about opening up in a safe place the exploration of ideas. And I think something that sometimes holds teams back is the type of meeting etiquette or process that we're used to, whereby if someone comes up with a bright idea, then they'll often get landed with it within executing it. And so that actually holds people back from sharing good ideas. So this idea around the fact that you can throw all sorts of things out into the open, be it in a coaching session or a team strategic session or whatever it is, it's a safe place in which you can throw lots of ideas out. Nothing is silly, nothing's rejected out of hand. And then everything is kind of assessed based on its potential rather than just on its risk and its downsides, on the understanding that you're not going to be able to do everything. And so you then have the strategic part, which is the deciding which of these ideas are we going to pursue, which actually help us to move a step closer to our vision. And strategy is about saying no as much as it's about saying yes. And so I think coaching is a similar safe place in which you can explore possibilities. The limiting factors and the risks are an important element to that, but it's also about opening up that positive mindset and that growth mindset as well.
Yes, it is. And that comes into the third, one of the third components of emotional intelligence. It's around optimistic thinking. And, as human beings, particularly at times of threat, which we're going through now, we tend to look for more threat. We tend to err on the side of caution. We tend to become more glass half empty. And so it's really an opportunity to reflect and start to look at what we've done well so far, what's going well, and what if we couldn't fail, could we do? And it's trying to just strip away that natural human tendency to limit the threats and the risk.
Yeah, I love that question in one of your articles. If you knew you couldn't fail, what else would you like to introduce? This concept of just ignore the risks for the moment, assume you can't fail. What are the options out there? What are the opportunities for you? It's a great mindset and great question to be asking a team. So in order to make this really practical for people who are listening, I'd love to hear if you have any top tips that you would give a leader within an independent school who feels that they want to do something actively, proactively to boost their levels of resilience. Do you have top tips to offer people?
My first top tip would be self before other. I think that as a leader, you will have been pulled in so many different directions, not just with work, but family situations as well. And we are human at the end of the day. And unless we look after ourselves, we will not be able to lead. We will not be able to look after family. And so I think it's noticing what is depleting you, what is affecting you in a negative way, and what actually makes you feel more energized, upbeat, relaxed, calm, whatever it is, and being absolutely militant in terms of building those things into your day on a consistent basis. Because to lead, you have to be aware of others. You have to be mindful of other situations, managing difference, managing other people who are going to be emotional. You have to think long term. You have to think strategically, and you won't be able to do that if you're not looking after yourself and balancing your own needs. So that's my first tip. I think the second tip would be, now is probably the best time ever to ask, whenever someone pushes back, to ask why not. We haven't done it that way before. So almost, challenge assumptions. We may have always done it this way, but what if we tried it a different way? What's the worst thing that can happen if we tried it this way? What's the best thing that can happen? It's that sort of, getting it in perspective again, challenging the way that we and I have always done things, and being willing to step out of your comfort zone, your safe zone, and experience risk and potential failure, which is difficult for most of us. Most of us tend to fear failure in some degree or another, and be willing to challenge and test and try. But the most important thing, and this is my third tip,
yes,
is reflection. So reflect on not just yourself in terms of, each day, how you're feeling, what's gone well each week, but with your team, and also on your projects and your activities. Really reflect and to find out what you've learned from it. What didn't work, what took a lot of resource, or cost more than you thought it was going to be, or didn't get the attendance, or didn't get the response that you'd hoped for, and learn, because it's going to be through courage, strategic thinking, innovation, and data and intelligence, and a combination of the two, that's actually going to enable us to adapt and evolve our organizations through this.
Absolutely. I love that. So 3 top tips there: self before other, looking after yourself before others, have a questioning attitude of why not, and helping others to feel open in the way that they share their ideas and so on. Fantastic. And then thirdly, having the time to reflect both on yourself and your team's activities. Absolutely brilliant. I have to be honest, I'll share with you, number 1 is the one that I struggle with. Oh my goodness, the whole idea of looking after yourself before others is something that I've really haven't got sorted. And one of those is about having strategies for building in time for things like reflection and self-care and strategic thinking and so on. Do you have any practical tips on how to find the time for this? I feel like that's one of the barriers that people often come up against.
Julia, it's something we all struggle with, and it's something that comes up in every coaching session that I have, and it's something I struggle with as well.
So it's not just me then, that's good.
I think no, not at all. I think the world and the workplace is going at such a fast pace, and there is so many demands and interruptions coming at us from so many different channels. This really is a question of, do you want to be the driver of the car, or do you want other people to be jumping in and out of the driver's seat and driving the car and you don't know where you're going? It's that sort of taking back control, and it's about ring fencing and protecting, and it's about your self-discipline and commitment to doing that. And it is very hard, and it's a practice. It's not something that it's going to happen overnight. It's all part of sort of knowing yourself. It's knowing what works for you and making a commitment, as I said, and ring fencing. If you have your emails open every hour of the day, they are going to distract you. Only you have that power to make a choice that if you have a 15-minute break and you go for a walk, that you don't take your phone with you. In fact, you might turn it off. Only you have that power and choice to turn your emails off at 9 o'clock at night, so that you actually have some segue downtime before you go to sleep, so you have a restful deep sleep so that you're more empowered the next day. And it's all about choice. And the other thing it's about is about focus. So again, this comes back to taking time to reflect. So at the end of the day, what have I achieved today, and what do I need to do tomorrow? And then just stripping it back to the bare priorities. Because if we focus on too many things and then we load that up with lots of interruptions and distractions, we really are not as effective as we could be. And so it's about ring fencing time, but also focusing on one thing at a time. And probably, this is a practice I try and do myself. I will say, what 3 things, and no more than 3 things, do I absolutely need to get done today? Because if I don't, there's going to be a major disaster. And if I get anything else done, that's great. I get I pat myself an extra time on the back. But it is about, it's false economy to think that you can do lots of things, in a short space of time. You're putting yourself under pressure. You won't be performing at your best. You're the driver of the car. And would you be listening to the radio, on the phone, doing a Zoom call while you're driving the car? No.
So true. Yes. No, that's really good advice. And a lot of the people that I work with, I help them to focus on the things that are actually going to make a difference for their fundraising in particular, or their strategy as a whole school. And it is about focus. Strategic focus is an absolutely key part of this, I think. So I guess it's making resilience part of your core strategy, your personal strategy, and then making it important. And those proactive activities, so often with fundraisers, it's things like making major gifts calls and things. So the proactive activity that we know has to happen, but always just gets pushed down the to-do list. If we can put looking after ourselves on that list of important proactive activities, then we can ring fence time for it and really focus on it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And it comes back to feeling and being your best, because when you feel your best, then you can do more. And it all sort of like, and to feel your best, you need to look after yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jo. A couple of quotes to leave with. I love the idea that overwhelm is optional. A lot of us don't question that. It's a part of our modern life, but taking the tips that you've shared with us today can really make sure that it is optional and that we don't have to face that overwhelm every day. And putting ourselves in the driving seat. We're the ones that are driving our career, our lives. We're the ones that can make those choices about what to prioritize and what to make time for. As hard as it sounds, and I know from personal experience that it's not as easy as all that, the more that we can be intentional and consciously prioritizing this activity, the better we're going to be seeing our performance coming out of this crisis. So thank you so much, Jo, for joining us today. Really appreciate your time. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Juliet. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Independent School Podcast, the podcast that helps senior leaders in private schools to think and act more strategically, both because they want to secure the future of their school and because they want to help build a more equal and just world. You can listen in everywhere that podcasts are available. And if you want to catch up on previous episodes or follow any of the links that I've mentioned today, just head over to www.consultjuliet.co.uk/podcast.